The Judicial Service Commission continues interviews for the 5 vacant posts in the Supreme Court of Appeal today. 11 candidates are vying for the 5 vacancies in the country's second highest court. Let's get more on what we can expect today at the proceedings that are expected to go all the way, I think, up until Monday. We speak to Research and Advocacy Officer at Judges Matter, that's Zikhona Ndlebe, who joins us from Cape Town. Zikhona, good morning to you. Let's head straight into the issues. There's a lot I'm going to put to you. Let's start with the interviewing process. There has been quite a fair amount of criticism in the past about commissioners, instead of asking competency questions to the judicial officer, politics comes into the fray. Talk to us about what you think day one of these interviews was like in terms of asking questions that are relevant.
You are absolutely correct that there's been a lot of concerns in the past, especially during the April interviews last year, that led to litigation. And subsequent to that, after the appointment of Chief Justice Zondo, we saw that he tried to adopt the 2010 criteria, which sets out what questions should be asked and how they should be asked to candidates by the commissioners. And we had hoped that there will be a finalization of the criteria during these interviews, but we have not seen that. So yesterday's interviews were not as bad as they've been in the past. And I think that can also be attributed to the chairperson, which is something that we've observed, that there are different chairing styles that the different chairpersons of the commission employ during the interviews. So the questions that were asked were all about what questions that were to be expected: transformation, the candidates' qualifications, their experience and expertise. But there should be more to that, because this is a Supreme Court of Appeal. These are Supreme Court of Appeal interviews, and the questions that are asked to candidates should be specific to the requirements and competencies that are required of a person at the SCA. But we have not seen much of that. But another concern that we've observed is the time that interviews take for each candidate. So yesterday's first candidate, Judge Huele's interview, took about 2 hours, and we saw a fluctuation of the time that each candidate is interviewed for. So that's something that has to be observed by the JSC and has to be corrected. Each candidate is supposed to be allocated 40 minutes per interview, and we don't see that happening. So the JSC is not following its own rules, basically.
Well, Zikhona, I think there's something to be said there then about whether or not the commissioners, as they prepare interviews or prepare questions for the interviewees, surely there's something to be said about whether or not they are well prepared. We get critiqued here as journalists for asking questions that should matter to a person like yourself, relevant questions. So that criteria should apply to commissioners. Do you think that these commissioners even apply their minds before coming into these interviews, or they come pregnant with political questions?
So the process is that the commissioners will get the candidates' application documents and comments from the various bodies on each candidate way before the interviews start. So it will be weeks before the interviews start that they get those documents. So they're supposed to go through those documents. Whether they do that or not, it's something that we are not sure about. But we also know that the JSC meets. So, for example, yesterday it met before the interviews started at 12 for an internal closed discussion. Perhaps that discussion was on how the interviews would be conducted and to sensitize the new commissioners that are at the JSC now. But whether the JSC actually sits down and plans what questions each commissioner is going to ask based on a criteria, I doubt that very much. Because, for example, we saw yesterday interview of Judge Mandela Makaula. It was based on not one, but it was mostly based on his writing skills while acting at the Supreme Court of Appeal, and almost all the commissioners that asked him questions had a question about that. Yes, it was a cause for concern, and it was something that should have been, it was correctly ventilated by the Commission to Makaula, but it was not necessary for almost each and every commissioner to ask the same question. So it begs the question whether the commissioners actually sit down and plan which question each commissioner is going to pose to a candidate. And this is something that we've contrasted with the Magistrates Commission, which sits down and has a list of questions that each commissioner will ask to a candidate. And they stick to that list and they stick to the time frame because they know exactly what questions each commissioner is going to ask a candidate. We don't see that happening with the JSC.
Okay, all right. So that's one area that I suppose we have got to pay attention to, not just as journalists, but researchers like yourself. So let's move on to the issue of gender parity. I was reading a piece and it had to do with the candidate that was interviewed yesterday, and she complained bitterly about the issues of patriarchy that still exist in our jurisprudence. The women leaders are not coming through in the judiciary, Zikhona. Do you think that this round of questions is likely to tamper with that a little bit, or does something drastic need to happen for women judges to start filtering through? And what might that be?
We've seen some improvement in the judiciary as compared to the past. We've seen women being appointed to the judiciary, but we've always had the concern that women are not being appointed in leadership positions. So, for example, we've seen the current Deputy Chief Justice moving from being a president of the Supreme Court of Appeal to being the Deputy Chief Justice. So the question is, who's going to fill her shoes at the Supreme Court of Appeal? It should be a woman because perhaps it should be a woman because we've seen the role that she has played at the Supreme Court of Appeal and the transformation that has taken place at the SCA because of that role that she's played. You've seen a lot of women being appointed to the SCA, and this is an agenda that she drove and made sure that she would complete before she leaves the SCA, and she did just that. And then we've not had a woman Chief Justice. That's another leadership position. And we've seen the Judge President, Monica Liu, retiring. She was one of the two women, including Justice Maya, who are in a leadership position. But currently, there aren't any Judge Presidents who are women. So that's a big concern for us. And we are hoping that this round of interviews will change, will have some positive impact in transforming the leadership positions in the judiciary, because women can lead as well. So whatever concerns that might be present relating to women leading, those concerns are not proven. Women can take up leadership positions, and that's something that we need to see happening in the judiciary.
Zikhona Ndlebe, time against us. Let's leave this conversation there. Researcher and advocacy officer at the organization Judges Matter.